Christmas shopping season gets into full swing. Finding a parking space can often be a stressful experience. And here's a word of warning: be very careful where you leave your car, because cash-starved councils across Yorkshire and Lincolnshire could soon be allowed to fine drivers a lot more for parking offences. However, motoring campaigners are claiming there could be a legal problem with some parking tickets. Here's Sean Stowell.
Imagine for a second you're a local authority accountant. Just how do you make some money?
You could try turning the street lighting off a little bit earlier, or charging a little bit more for a cup of tea in the staff canteen. But then there's the old revenue-raising chestnut of parking fines.
Councils up and down the land rake in millions from parking charges and fines. In fact, traffic wardens are probably relatively safe in the coming rounds of swinging council cuts because they actually generate revenue. That's why one pressure group is already lobbying government to allow councils to increase income raised from fines.
The British Parking Association has members, which includes a number of local councils, and they're hoping that the government will allow them to increase the maximum parking fine from £60 to, in some cases, £90.
We're asking the government to look at the penalty charge level, particularly in England outside London. We're not suggesting any particular charge at the moment, but the important point to make really is that penalty charges are designed to ensure that motorists comply with parking controls.
But there's a problem. If the signs and lines around a parking bay aren't quite right in the eyes of the law, then a fine can't be right either. For instance, it would be possible to contest a fine imposed on this road because the signs and the lines aren't absolutely clear. Scarborough is one of the many towns and cities where this issue has been raised, but it's one where the question of legality was also scrutinised very closely behind closed doors. BBC Yorkshire has obtained a copy of this document drawn up for Scarborough Council by leading traffic barrister Stephen Sylvain. It shows how there is at least a significant question mark over the legality of fining when there is a known problem with signs and lines.
It says here, it could be reasonably argued that the payments were made by wrongful compulsion, and that therefore the council has an obligation to restore the sums wrongfully paid. What's that mean to you?
That means pay the money back. Proactively pay the money back. The local authorities know they have to pay the money back. They know they can't hold money unlawfully on account. They know they can't take and demand money off motorists when it doesn't back a traffic order because the signs and lines are wrong.
Retired traffic officer Keith Hughes advises motorists fighting parking tickets. He feels Scarborough Council has ignored the advice in the document. He cites the example of a client who knew 2 parking tickets were legally flawed. Scarborough Council nevertheless sent in bailiffs to clamp his car and even employed a lawyer to fight the case, which the council lost.
I think the value was over £600 because there's all the costs etc. added onto that, and the bailiff's costs obviously, and whether it's the car they seized or whether it was goods at the house they seized, it's still a considerable amount.
And this is for a parking ticket?
This is for a parking ticket. Basically the council's looking at this well, prior to the financial restraints they're looking at now. It's a cash cow for them.
In the past financial year, Leeds City Council grossed £3.3 million from parking fines. In Sheffield, £1.7 million, York £520,000, Lincolnshire almost £400,000, whilst the East Riding Council raised nearly £200,000. Not insignificant sums of money, and all the more precious in the age of austerity. Some of that revenue, which currently can only be spent on traffic measures, may have been raised through parking tickets open to legal challenge. But like many councils, Scarborough Council says its parking regime is watertight, accusing parking consultants of attempting to discredit local authorities. It added that North Yorkshire County Council and Scarborough Council were confident the decriminalisation of parking enforcement carried out in the area is both fair and reasonable, and has been shown to be acceptable through judicial process. But as lobbying and legal challenges continue behind the scenes, the stakes are being raised, and cash-starved councils await clarification on just how much parking fines can drive up their revenues.
Sean Stoll with that report. Well, joining us to discuss this are Andrew Cooper, a Green councillor from Kirklees, and in our Westminster studio is Lord Lucas, Conservative peer and motoring campaigner. Lord Lucas, if I can start with you, is it realistic in the current economic climate to ask local councils to pay back every penny they've taken from motorists where the signage or road markings were not up to regulation standard?
Well, if they've been found to have done something which exceeds their powers and have taken money without due cause, then not to pay it back is theft. If a bank took money from your account and wrongfully and then you didn't pay it back, that would be theft. If the taxman overcharged you and then didn't pay the money back, that would be theft. It's the same with local councils.
Andrew Cooper, some local councils want to increase their parking fines in line with London authorities. That would mean going up to £120. I mean, do you feel some sympathy with motorists who feel they're being hammered in the current climate?
I think you've got to look at this, the current climate, where we've got 28% cuts in local authority funding. Money has got to come from somewhere, and it's quite difficult in this sort of climate to find
Motorists
that.
are an easy hit, though, aren't they?
And it would that it was not necessary to do so, and I would certainly prefer it if we weren't doing this at this particular time. I think we've obviously got to find alternatives for people who are using cars, but this isn't about that. This is about public sector cuts. This is about immense losses in services and jobs for local people. And we're using this, local authorities are having to use this as a way of raising money. It's not about transport, it's not about hammering cars, it's just a way of finding money.
All right, Lord Lucas, what would you say to people if suddenly their local council turned around and said, I'm sorry, we can't rebuild your local school, we can't provide decent services for the elderly because we've got to pay back millions of pounds in parking fines?
I think everyone would be very upset under those circumstances. The best thing to happen is that local authorities should not act in a way which puts them outside the law. If they're careful with the way that they sign and line their roads, if they're careful with the way in which they enforce their penalties, then they won't get into this problem. To come back to what your previous speaker said, I entirely agree we need ways of raising revenue locally, and parking charges and other road usage charges are a proper way of doing that. But if you start trying to raise revenue through enforcement, that's rather like incentivizing police to arrest more people or the taxman to investigate more people. You get a corruption of the relationship between local authorities and the motorist, local authorities and their citizens. That makes everyone's life less happy.
Let me just get Andrew Cooper to respond to that, because many people just see this as a revenue raising measure, a bit like speed cameras, don't they? And again, it's the motorist who's suffering.
Well, this issue simply wouldn't arise if the government would properly fund local authorities in the first place. We're losing millions of pounds. People are going to suffer. And so we've got to find ways of dealing with that. And if we're not sort of going to get money from central government, it's got to come from somewhere. And this is it's not something that anybody would want to do in this way. But that's what's happening.
Very briefly, Lord Lucas, what's your advice to motorists who believe they've been wrongly fined?
They should pursue their options of appeal to the end, because the courts and the tribunals that judge these things by and large take fair decisions. So don't just pay the fine, appeal.
OK, the Politics Show Yorkshire and Lincolnshire parking meter has run out for today, and with that we will go back to John Sopel in London.